Hello, this is Ryan from Turtle Power Fitness, and I want to start documenting my hip journey because I think it's going to be an interesting sort of an A/B test. Um, yeah, I am an independent personal trainer and masseuse and Qigong instructor, and I teach some group movement classes that are this fun form of movement games. And a bunch of other cool movement stuff. My background is mostly in dance, and then I got into like fitness and weightlifting and stuff like that more recently in my 30s. Um, but I want to make this video to kind of document this interesting track that I'm taking to try to deal with a lot of arthritis and other issues in my right hip and my left hip because I'm sort of taking two very different tracks for each of these things. And I thought it would be interesting for other people who are struggling with hip arthritis to hear about the outcomes from either a surgical and sort of a Western approach or a non-surgical and a more Eastern or less invasive approach. So it's also a really great rainstorm behind me right now. Um, I've always struggled with limited range of motion, limited flexibility, and I think to some degree some strength limitations in my hips. Studying dance for a long time, I would just again and again run into this wall or this ceiling in terms of my flexibility, and often accompanied with a lot of pain. Things got really bad starting around 2021 with my right hip. Um, got a bunch of MRIs, a bunch of X-rays. I was diagnosed with femoral acetabular impingement syndrome of my right hip, along with a labral tear, um, as well as stage 3 arthritis of the right hip, with about 2 millimeters of joint space left at that time. Went through a bunch of physical therapy, was doing all my own rehab. It wasn't really helping. My functionality was getting worse. So in January of 2002, I got a right hip arthroscopy where no, I'm sorry, January of 2023. Did I say 2002? I meant 2023. In January 2023, I got a arthroscopic surgery of the right hip. So they went in there, they successfully reattached the labrum using little suture anchors, and they cleaned up all the bone spurs, right, in the femoral acetabular impingement. For anyone who doesn't know, FAI syndrome or femoral acetabular impingement is bony growths on either the rim of the acetabulum, which is the sort of socket of the ball and socket joint, or on the head of the femur, which is the ball of the ball and socket joint, which means that they're like running into each other. So you're getting bone on bone. So that was in January of 2023. My functionality, range of motion, strength, pain, everything got way worse after that surgery for me. Basically, what happened in retrospect is that the arthritis I had in the joint sort of took off and the inflammation never came back down. I went through multiple rounds of physical therapy. I got PRP injections. I was trying acupuncture. I was icing a lot. I was using castor oil and getting into an infrared sauna after covering the joint with castor oil on a pretty regular basis. I was doing a lot of soft tissue release and mobilization, so a lot of work with like a lacrosse ball and a foam roller, and then doing these strengthening exercises for all the small stabilizing muscles of the hip. A lot of stretching. Basically throwing everything I could at it, and it just got worse and worse and worse for a year and a half. Really shitty year and a half. Until recently, in July of 2024, I got a total hip replacement on my right hip. The arthritis, by the way, had progressed from a stage 3 to a stage 4 between the arthroscopic surgery and the total hip replacement. So now in my right hip, I am just 2 weeks out from that joint replacement, working on my rehab, and I now have so it was an anterior approach, first of all, which I would recommend to anyone getting over hip replacement. Get the anterior approach. I've heard some people say that maybe it's contraindicated for older populations. I'm not sure why. I don't know enough to understand why that would be. but it is, I think, in my opinion, like in my very limited opinion, just great because they don't have to cut through muscle tissue. So um, I'm back up and walking around pretty quickly post-op, and I have an uncemented titanium implant into the femur with a ceramic head on that titanium implant, interfacing with a polyethylene liner that is affixed to a titanium implant on the rim of the acetabulum. So I think the technical term for those components would be like it's an uncemented ceramic on poly implant, which was done using an anterior approach. Sorry for the sound of the rain. Um, the reason that I want to make this video, though, I think this is kind of fascinating, um, because let's see if I can. All right, I don't know if that's any better, but I'm trying to block out the sound of the rain. The reason I think this is fascinating is because so I got the X-ray results from my surgery, and it was like, all the components look good, no bony abnormalities, and also stage 4 arthritis on the left hip. So I'm in this interesting point, right? I'm 39 years old. I've had 2 surgeries now on my right hip. An arthroscopic surgery that made everything way worse, and I would definitely recommend, just from my own personal experience, and there is some literature that shows that getting an arthroscopic surgery on a joint that has arthritis can exacerbate the arthritis. Now, it doesn't happen in all cases. There's other literature that would indicate that like an arthroscopic surgery on a joint can improve the situation. I think, I'm not qualified or trained in reviewing scientific literature. I don't have the academic background for that, but I did read a shit ton of articles after, my hip got worse. And it looks to me like it's somewhat inconclusive as to whether or not an arthroscopic surgery on femoral acetabular impingement syndrome is a good idea. So if you have hip arthritis, I personally would not recommend getting a scope. I would recommend, delaying a hip replacement as long as possible and then getting a hip replacement. That is like, pretty much a gold standard surgery that tends to have really good outcomes. But what I think is interesting now is, in my case, I've got the right hip, which has been now cut open twice, second time in a major way for a total joint replacement, and I'm now committed to this, right? This implant that I have is going to last me 20 to 30 years, knock on wood, maybe it'll be 30. And if I'm smart with it, I'll, get a longer life out of it, and then I'm going to have a revision. They're going to have to cut me open again, pull out that polyethylene liner, which is going to have worn down, and if there's been something called lysis, which means the little plastic pieces and plastic debris has gotten in sort of in between the other metal components in the bone, they might have to replace other metal components as well. So I'm going to have to, and there might be like loss of bone stock at that point. Like I'm basically on this surgical track now. It's pretty likely, if not definite, that I'm going to have to get at least one revision of this hip replacement before I die. And now I need to learn how to work out with it and manage it and etc. Whereas on the left hip, I have not had an arthroscopic surgery. The arthritic pain and degeneration is like, it's stage 4 according to the x-rays, but the pain is nowhere near what the pain was on my right side. So I am planning on managing my left hip with non-invasive, non-surgical techniques for as long as I possibly can. So this is why I wanted to start making this series of videos of my hip journey, because maybe, I don't know if this is true, but fuck, why not? I'm gonna try. I'm like, a massage therapist. I'm trained in a form of massage called shiatsu massage, which is a form of East Asian bodywork based off the principles of Chinese medicine. So it also deals with internal health issues as well as musculoskeletal issues and, pains and injuries and things like that. So I know how to do techniques like gua sha, which is also known as Graston, cupping, different myofascial release techniques. I have some familiarity with different like fascial manipulations. I certainly know how to work with like the meridians through the technique of shiatsu, and then as well as my background as a personal trainer, just understanding a bunch about like soft self myofascial release and soft tissue work and stuff like that. So I'm going to be applying all of those tools that I have in my toolkit to my left hip. And just my intention is to not get surgery on my left hip. And so we've got this really kind of cool A/B test of like right hip, stage 4 arthritis. We tried an arthroscopy. That was fucked. Then we went to a total hip replacement. So far, so good. I'm expecting a pretty good outcome from this total hip replacement, given the approach and the components and my age and health and all that stuff. And then left hip, also stage 4 arthritis, but we are opting for non-surgical, non-invasive other approaches to try and keep me being able to do all the things that I want to do in my life. So as I get older, my intention is to keep making this series of videos where I keep sort of like tracking how is my right hip progressing, having had a total joint replacement, right? How is that holding up? What is it like with the scar tissue through the joint capsule? How does that affect my range of motion? Because that joint capsule has now been compromised twice, once through the scope and once through the replacement. How is it progressing with the components as I age? What's my like level of functionality in that hip versus my left hip? Which is how is the arthritis progressing just with all these non-invasive treatment modalities that I'm going to be using. And I'll document those in later videos and talk about like what I've done and stuff like that. So I plan to make a video like this every 6 months. I think it'll be a cool way to just sort of like keep track of what's going on with my hips. And then for anyone else who's struggling with hip arthritis, I just think this could potentially be a cool resource for you to be like, oh, there are options here, right? I could go the total hip replacement route, which maybe I will ultimately have to get on my left hip as well. Or I could go a more non-invasive, non-surgical route, and there's a ton of options, right? There's acupuncture, there's gua sha, there's cupping, there's tui na. These are all sort of the East Asian ways of working with something like arthritis. And there's also self-myofascial release, stretching, strengthening, all like more traditional sort of fitness ways of working with the joint. Yeah, not to mention like diet and lifestyle and all those kind of things that, you know, can help arthritis. The usual stuff, right? Don't smoke, don't drink, eat a whole foods, you know, diet. Yeah. All right, well, hopefully I'll get better at making YouTube videos as I do this, because I suck at making YouTube videos. I don't really understand this, and I'm sure I rambled on way too long, but this is just the first one, so hopefully they'll get better over time, and hopefully I'll learn to speak like a normal human. All right, everybody, take care.